The dark and unexplored corridors of mental illness within the Black community. Let's get right to it. Hello, once again, J Spot peeps, and thank you for taking some of your valuable time to spend here with me in the J Spot. And a big and hearty shout out to all the subscribers that we've picked up over the last 10 days. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. And for those of you who haven't yet subscribed and are watching this, make sure you give us a thumbs up, like, drop a comment, talk to me about what you hear, and make sure you subscribe if you enjoy the content and would like to continue to receive it going forward. I'm going off the grid a little bit here for the next few episodes. Some of you may or may not know that I am a writer. I'm what people call a wordsmith. Several years ago, I wrote a 4-part series about mental illness in the Black community. I wrote it for a magazine that I used to write for, and probably would like to write for again in the future. But the title is The Dark and Unexplored Corridors of Mental Illness Within the Black Community. This is the first part, titled Opening the Door. I write this mostly because I know from personal experience the stigmatizing that comes along with mental illness in the Black community. We consider it weak. Some consider it a joke. Some consider it a hoax. But I write it mostly because my late sister Dawn, suffered horribly from bipolar schizophrenia. And as a child, I never noticed it. I don't know that any of us did, because as children, what do you see? You don't notice. But what I did notice, that growing up in the 60s, I witnessed a lot of strange behavior in the African American community that at the time I never associated with mental illness. And unfortunately, as children are wrought to do, we would laugh at the man or the woman that we would see rocking back and forth, some as they sat quietly, others while they mumbled to themselves. And then there were those who would constantly display some type of whimsical yet disturbingly haunting smile, looking more through you than they would at you. And in those days, if you ever visited someone who had a family member that fit that description, that family member was often rustled off into another room within earshot of the person that's assigned to keep an eye on baby. And the visiting adults would fawn over the person and say, "Oh, poor thing, and what a shame." But as soon as they left the house and walking down the street or get into their car, they would be making jokes about how cray-cray the family was, and how surprised they were that the entire family wasn't locked up somewhere. Laughed at, hidden, disregarded, stigmatized, and more importantly, misunderstood. That pretty much summed up the attitude toward mental illness in the Black community then, and to a large degree even now. And in addition to the stigma associated with mental illness, cultural biases against mental health professionals and healthcare professionals in general prevented many African Americans from accessing care because of prior knowledge of experiments with historical misdiagnoses, inadequate treatment, and a lack of cultural understanding. And then, of course, there were, like I said, the stories about Tuskegee, the experiments down there, and Then there's Henrietta Lacks. So we recently, in the last couple of decades, discovered as a national story, a woman who was in, I think it was Johns Hopkins University, and she had a tumor, and they were extracting cells from her tumor and experimenting and running tests on her cells, unbeknownst to her. No compensation to the family. And then, of course, there's the survey that you would get, like surveys from the University of Virginia Medical School several years ago, where they surveyed medical students, white medical students, about their attitudes toward the tolerance level of black patients. And the majority of them, believe that blacks are more tolerant to pain than whites. And as a result, blacks don't get the proper medication. They don't get proper diagnoses. They don't get proper treatment. And what makes it worse is that inside within the black community, we almost constructively do this to ourselves, especially when it comes to mental illness. And as I said, my sister Dawn, she suffered greatly, and even as adults, we didn't realize how bad it was. I mean, we knew she had these episodes, but we were always encouraging her to take her medications. But little did we know that to her, the medication, the side effects of the medications were much worse than the treatment of the medications. Were not worth taking the medicine. And I gained insight on this only after she passed away. She passed away on St. Patrick's Day, 2001. I'll never forget it. I was homeless because I wasn't too far removed from my injury. But that particular night, I had borrowed money from one of my former co-workers to get a hotel room. And it was raining really bad that night. And apparently my sister had an episode. She checked herself into the emergency room, went to the emergency room, a local hospital in Patterson. They ran her away, chased her away, threatened to call the police on her. And subsequently, she started walking up the highway, going to my cousin's house as a place of refuge on a busy highway at night, St. Patrick's Day, raining cats and dogs, and she was hit by a drunk driver and killed instantly. But I gained insight into what she was going through an episode of Law and Order I was watching once, titled Pro Se. And it was a brilliant lawyer who refused to take medication. He suffered from the very thing my sister suffered from in this episode, at least. And he refused to take his medication, and as such, he had an episode and he killed a woman. He murdered a woman. And as it turns out, the guy was a brilliant lawyer, but he couldn't get work because of his illness. But he was being interviewed by the psychologist or psychiatrist from the prosecutor's office, Dr. Olivet, and he was telling her about the side effects of his medications and why he refused to take them. And he says, right now I'm on my medication. He said, but I'm struggling even to carry a conversation with you. He said, it feels as though I'm talking to you through a sweater. And it was a revelation to me as it related to my sister. I was like, was that what she suffered from when she took those meds? Because I can recall times when I've been struggling to take off a sweater or a sweatshirt and it would get stuck on my head and I'd panic simply from the mere couple of seconds that I was feeling claustrophobic. And then you couple that with the fact that not even 20 years ago, perhaps 25 years ago, when you saw a commercial for medication, you weren't getting all these 30 side effects that could be caused by taking one medication for a headache. Bowel obstruction, kidney, it's giving you symptoms in 30 different parts of your body just to treat one symptom. I've even seen a commercial that said, in rare occasions, the medication causes a fatal brain disease. I'm like, what? Really? And then it says these statements haven't been evaluated by the FDA. So who really knows if it's true? It may be true about the side effects, but who knows that the meds even achieve its efficacy as far as treating the results of treating the symptoms you originally take it for. And so, we're left with the fact that a very few percentage of psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers are even African American in America. And so, families with members who suffer with this are often, people who suffer with this illness in the African American community are often left to rely on family members, religious and social organizations for emotional support rather than to be able to get the proper care. And some of them are even afraid to even admit that they're having an issue. Because unlike our white counterparts, we don't have the luxury of blaming everything we do on trauma, on mental trauma. We don't get the luxury of saying, oh, we put pipe bombs behind 7-Eleven because we were just trying to have some fun. We don't get to burn down churches and say it was a prank that got out of hand. We don't get to shoot up schools or ram cars into crowds of people, and the first thing a politician says or a local law enforcement will say or the news pundits will say is this person has a mental illness. It's got to be a mental illness involved. Otherwise, they wouldn't. We don't act like that. But to hear the guy in Trading Places saying about Eddie Murphy's character, Valentine, he's probably been stealing since he could crawl. That's how our behavior is summed up. But having said all that, again, there's a serious issue with mental illness in our community, in the black community, that has yet to be explored properly. And over the next 3 episodes, we're going to attempt to do that. So please, join me for the next video. And make sure you subscribe. Make sure you drop us a like and drop a comment. Talk to me. Express some opinions about what you hear. Teach me something that I don't know. Let's learn from one another. Let's discover something about ourselves that we don't know. Let's rediscover something about the people that we do know. Let's resurrect some empathy and compassion in our communities. And let's strive to reach and realize our purpose. Thanks again, J-Spot peeps, for spending some of your valuable time here with me in the J-Spot. I look forward to seeing you back, having you back. And thanks again for all of you who have subscribed thus far. Thank you so much for your support. And make sure if you have anyone in your family or you yourself are suffering from a mental illness, make sure you get the proper help that you need. Reach out to someone and make your petitions known. Peace. I desire mercy. Your flesh will tell you, save yourself. You're not the keeper of your brother. Put compassion on the shelf. Ignore the cries of others. Your flesh will tell you, you deserve, that you are number one. Ignore the suffering you observe. For you, what have they done? Your flesh will tell you anything, that you're not inhumane. that raindrops you walk in between will feed your glory vein. Your flesh will tell you job well done and pat you on the back. Celebrate the race you've run, although you've run on the wrong track. Your flesh will tell you you come first. Too long you've been in line. That those unlike you are the worst. Ignore them. It's your time. Your flesh will tell you things are swell while it looks you in the eye. But there's one thing that your flesh won't tell. That one day your flesh will die. If only you had known the meaning of I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Matthew 12:7.